Godzilla the series is an animated Godzilla TV show from 1998. It's canon to the Roland Emmerich Godzilla movie, and it actually serves as a direct sequel following the events of that film. Now, saying the film itself was met with critical dismay would be an understatement, but as time went on, the hate has died down. Unlike the film, however, Godzilla the series is what gave fans a Godzilla worthy of the god in his name. This TV show is what many fans remember as being the true American Godzilla as opposed to the one we got in the movie. With brand new monsters, a tougher and meaner Godzilla, and more likable characters, this show had introduced fans to excellent new ideas and stories that truly broadened the array of Godzilla's lore, offering new places to take this Monster King story, which had never been done in the franchise prior. Within the past few weeks, I'd sat down and rewatched both this series and the animated Kong series, twice over, and I'll tell you what, I thoroughly enjoyed both shows, and despite me growing up on Kong the animated series, with this show following suit as I got older, I personally enjoyed this show more than I did the Kong show. That's not to say the Kong show is bad, but when it all boils down to which one I personally enjoyed a bit more, Godzilla the series has the edge in that category. But what makes this show so special? What new places does it take the character of Godzilla? How does it handle the human characters better than other Godzilla movies had within the overarching franchise? Well, grab a bag of popcorn because we'll be talking about what makes Godzilla the series so special. Enjoy. In order to talk about what makes this show so special, I'd be doing a disservice without first talking about the human characters heading it. Being an animated kids TV show, the series has quite a unique ensemble of characters who are very likable. But don't let the fact that it's a kids show fool you. These characters all maintain surprisingly complex relationships and dynamics with one another the more you analyze them, which gives adults all the more reason to appreciate these characters as opposed to only kids being able to. And that is honestly a rarity within the Godzilla franchise. There are a lot of lessons these characters learn and tend to push forward to the viewer watching. The themes of each character are also quite apparent from the start, but as we grow with every individual, you'll start to see just how profound those themes gradually evolve. The main character of the show is 𝗦𝗣𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗟, who is an absolute far cry from his film counterpart, which is a great thing, because Nick in this series has a lot more depth and character than Matthew Broderick's Nick ever showed. No offense, Matthew. Throughout most of the show, 𝗦𝗣𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗟 is characterized as the typical no-nonsense leader, but what separates him from that stereotype are the many moments in which he shows care for other characters, as well as emotional levity and even comedy. In the beginning of the show, for instance, we learn that Nick has an intern named Randy who works for his organization. When the two are on screen together, it's clear they have history with one another and that Randy sees Nick as a close friend and vice versa. This may seem like a small detail, but it subtly adds to the fatherly feeling Nick radiates, which will grow over time as he adopts Godzilla and fully forms the Heat team. That being said, Nick is no professional at this. He's still relatively young, and so we see that he screws up from time to time. Sometimes his emotions cloud his judgment, as we see in an Arctic episode where Nick's jealousy got in the way of Audrey's interview with a shady business-type character. Through Nick's hardened exterior, we get consecutive glimpses at his softer, more emotional side. We do get moments alone with him when he's in a vulnerable state. His relationship with Audrey proves wary sometimes. Since both are adults, they often spend large chunks of time apart for their individual lines of work. With Nick running Heat and Audrey being a young, rising news anchor, both people inevitably spend a lot of time apart. And that's honestly a very mature dynamic to have in an animated kids TV show. No matter what life throws at them, be it a monster or a news story 100 miles away, Audrey and Nick show each other that they will always be with one another and won't give up on what they have. What I love about these two characters and their dynamic is that when they get into a fight, they always come back to one another. Not in an unhealthy way either. If Nick or Audrey know that they are wrong, they admit it. This is, again, an incredibly mature theme to have between these characters in a TV show revolving around a giant fire-breathing lizard. The two start off somewhat rocky, but as the show goes on, we see the two characters grow closer both individually and codependently. That's what's so amazing. It isn't like a static relationship where one person constantly fucks up and treats the other like shit, never learning from their mistakes. Both individuals actually grow together. The issues in their relationship span far more than just distance between one another. Nick's biggest issue with Audrey is that she always seems to just use him for news headlines. Feeling used is a terrible feeling, but Audrey's able to acknowledge this. As a human being, she's gonna screw up from time to time. And there are moments where she slips and her news anchor side takes over, causing her to come off as blunt and headline hungry, losing sight of how she's affecting Nick. But with time, she grows to suppress that side of herself and truly work on her character. In a beautiful moment during Season 2, Episode 3, Scale, the entire episode is shot from the perspective of Audrey's new camera. Audrey has shot material worthy of winning her a Pulitzer and sending her career skyrocketing into the fame and glory she ever so desires and has been working for since we first met the character. But by the end of the episode, the videotape is ejected from a TV and Audrey throws it into a fire. wrapping herself around Nick as she tells him some stories are better left untold. Like, that's beautiful, you know? That's such an amazing moment because it acts as a huge milestone in this character's growth. This moment is one of my favorites with her in the show. Earlier on in the series, we also get moments where Audrey signals her strength and love she has for Nick, often setting aside her news anchor tendencies and rushing into danger to heroically save him and make sure he's okay. It really adds to their relationship and humanizes Audrey even further, because you could very easily make her the only a news anchor character who wants nothing more than her goals, but instead they change her up to be someone who actually has a heart. Nick isn't without his issues as well, as sometimes he can be a bit unreliable and standoffish to Audrey. However, he's able to acknowledge when he's in the wrong and is able to change for the better, further connecting the two. Circling back to Nick to cap this off, he shows many signs of comedic levity, which is a key ingredient in building a likable and relatable protagonist. When he plays Mother Hen and cares for each member of the Heat team, it really adds to his character and gives the viewers a lot more of a reason to like him. Other members of the Heat team include Dr. Elsie Chapman and Dr. 𝗦𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗟. Elsie is a character who has a lot more of a sarcastic tongue, and despite her flirtatious personality, she really is just an insecure person. One of Elsie's biggest character traits is that she brushes a lot of things off with humor, undeterred by how lonely and unconfident she is deep down. A lot of the times her age is brought up, even though she's like only in her late 20s, which isn't a bad thing at all. And yeah, Elsie is oftentimes just plagued with a feeling of loneliness. It doesn't help that we get an episode where we learn more about her family life and that her parents often favor her sister over her, who actually has a companion. Both parents conveyed that they weren't impressed with Elsie's achievements in science, and until the moment came where Elsie saved their butts, it's apparent that that is what she was always facing in the show off-screen. We learn Elsie had a past lover named Lance who always took time off of her and instead constantly got distracted by his field of work, and it just adds to how lonely she is. And when you see her constantly making passes at Nick, it's pretty clear why she does it. It's her insecurities resurfacing. It makes her human, and an enjoyable one at that. Over the course of the show, she begins a relationship with Dr. 𝗦𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗟, but before that, there are even moments where Craven gets the girl, and Elsie sometimes just has to sit there and watch that go down, unable to say anything because nothing's official yet. It's a very heartbreaking feeling to have, which I'm sure we all have felt in our lives before, and it adds a lot to her character, but she keeps her head up and oftentimes is shown having a blast with what she does. Harking back to Dr. Craven, he acts as the oversensitive, nerdy character. As I said earlier, he becomes well acquainted with Elsie as the show goes on, but throughout the series, he's pretty much the weaker character on the Heat team that is sheltered and cowardly and constantly just afraid of everything around him. He has a great dynamic with other Heat team member Reindy Hernandez, as well as a great dynamic with 𝗦𝗘𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗓. Looking past his soft exterior, Craven shares a lot of nice qualities that are on Elsie's radar. He's genuinely a nice and understanding person, and the two spend a lot of time together, often displaying wonderful synergy between each other when studying monsters. The final two members of the Heat team include Reindy Hernandez and 𝗦𝗘𝗘𝗓. Reindy serves as the comedic element of the show, which mainly is due to the fact that he's so young, hence his more childish sense of humor which kids can easily enjoy and relate to. Yet unlike the pitfall most other comedic characters run into, Reindy never overdoes it. What's great about him is that a lot of his comedic lines are very well written, which again you can't really say the same for in regards to most other characters who merely serve as comic relief. He's regularly shown cheering the G-Man on whenever he shows up and is most likely Godzilla's biggest supporter.
Yeah, get him, big guy!
Reindy is also still in school, so he's very busy with monster action, and that oftentimes means that he forgets he's still pretty much just a kid. He and Nick share this almost father-son dynamic when the school begins to get involved with Reindy. Nick never pushes his members to stay on the team. They're more than welcome to leave if they'd like. That's another reason why he's so great. But it's also great seeing him come to Reindy's defense when the school begins to rain down on him. The fact that Nick takes Reindy under his wing, and we're aware in the beginning of the show it's been this way for 14 months, adds a lot to both their characters. Reindy and Craven share a hilarious back and forth, and while they initially start off at each other's throats, they come to become fond of one another and often won't be found admitting that. But Craven's vulnerable characteristics seem to feed great off Randy's comedic banter. 𝗦𝗘𝗘𝗓𝗓, I know I'm butchering that last name, but we'll just call her Monique. Monique, on the other hand, is just the complete opposite of Reindy Hernandez. She's cold, tough, and rarely cracks jokes. But as time goes on, she begins to grow a soft spot for Godzilla, who she originally was sent out to kill, and even for Reindy as well. Monique is the main guns of the Heat team and offers protection, but what she comes to learn from Craven is that it's absolutely okay to ask for help sometimes. She's able to teach characters like Craven and Reindy to be more tough, while they are able to teach her to be more open to help and compassionate. She initially starts off rocky with Nick, but as the show goes on, Nick makes it clear to her that he would never abandon any of his teammates in the heat of battle. She often challenges Nick on his views in regards to monsters and leadership, and it's actually nice to see this conflicting dynamic between the two because you get to hear both sides of the argument. Monique thinks all of the monsters should be exterminated, Nick thinks that not all the monsters are evil, and that it won't be easy to capture each and every mutation. As the show goes on, it's nice to see Monique ease up on that stance, as Godzilla time and time again proves her wrong. Randy always throws major passes at Monique, who often shoots them down, so often it rapidly becomes a comedic extent, but there are many hints that Monique actually does care about Randy. The two share a great back and forth, and they seem to work really well with one another. Throughout the show, all of these characters seem to share major signs of development as it goes on, which is what makes for a very appealing human cast. Within Godzilla media, there are always military elements when you're dealing with giant monsters. Usually, however, I find this always to be the most boring part of a Godzilla film because it's so unrelatable. Sometimes you end up with characters who are just blocks of wood, other times you have a bunch of nobodies going back and forth, exchanging boring military exposition, but Godzilla the series reintroduces Major Hicks, who serves as the military branch of the cast and avoids all of these pitfalls. We spend some time with him and his dynamic with Nick, and he isn't usually like the stereotypical tough military man character most of the other media portrays. Instead, we get a character we could actually understand the motivations of, and one who shows signs of growth in a believable way when he actually sees Godzilla act as a force for good. When Major Hicks and Nick are at odds, it's nice to see his emotional side as he often understands and believes Nick whenever a tense situation calls for it. I've never been a fan of the military character or seeing a boardroom full of political leaders all clashing on what to do with Godzilla. I've always loved the grounded approach that this show takes with the monsters, as well as what King Kong stories usually do with having these characters on the ground and in the action, as opposed to seeing it unfold on a screen. Major Hicks could have easily been a doomed character, but instead they take the time to humanize him further and expand upon the dynamic he shares with Nick. He's very much a different character from most other military characters within Godzilla media, adding to why the show is so special. Excellent writing doesn't just stop at the human characters, however. Moving forward to the titular character of the series, Godzilla himself has incredible writing for a giant monster. This Godzilla is developed from the second he is born to the final episode where he's a fully grown adult battling monsters with Nick and gang by his side. The kinds of character development we get for Godzilla in this series is honestly unlike any other incarnation of Godzilla we've seen before or since. Godzilla in this show wears his emotions on his sleeve, and make no mistake, despite him being a reptile, he's incredibly expressive. The animators do an amazing job at portraying emotional feelings through this character. Godzilla is drawn in a way that is easy to tell how he's feeling while also anatomically being accurate to the design Patrick Tatopoulos had come up with for the film. Doubling back to Godzilla's character development, he immediately imprints upon Nick when he's born, and so he outright gains a human's trust. Aside from the Hanna-Barbera TV show, this hasn't really been done in the franchise before. This show takes the time to flesh out Godzilla's connection with Nick. The reasons provided as to why he would even connect with and care for Nick in the first place is plausible, realistic, and actually makes sense. Suspension of disbelief isn't even required in that regard because real animals can do this too. Godzilla caring for a group of humans as if he's their own is a level of trust we have never seen with this character have before. I mean, we've seen his son have it a couple times, but never before like this. I know this is technically Godzilla Jr., but as he grows up he becomes the adult Godzilla we all know and love, yet he still cares about a group of humans to this extent. Meanwhile, in the overarching franchise, we've only really seen that with the juvenile Godzilla, again excluding the Hanna-Barbera Godzilla. It's a very fresh and new direction to take the character, and it works exceptionally well. There are really nice moments in the show where Nick is studying Godzilla, and then he slowly learns to put down his notes, instead taking care of him like an actual father. There are times where Nick actually puts his hands on Godzilla or pulls out spikes from his feet, and it's really cute. Seeing Nick pay Godzilla back for all the times he saves Nick is such a nice and heartwarming idea. We also see this Godzilla nearly gain a mate and take up the mantle of being a father to the mate's egg, but this is cut prematurely as a battle ensues with a giant turtle, which puts an end to all the monsters except Godzilla. That episode ends on a sour note as we see Godzilla actually get saddened by this event. We haven't seen that kind of story play out on screen before, which is always a welcome surprise as long as it's handled well. In the 3-episode event in Season 1 titled Monster Wars, Godzilla ultimately ends up having to choose between his adopted father Nick and his biological father that died and was revived with alien technology, the original Godzilla. We see our Godzilla be put to a standstill, that is when he wasn't under mind control. The kinds of moral dilemmas and emotional character arcs you would expect to see Godzilla in his main franchise go through is something we only really get to see in this particular series. The character hasn't really been through anything like this before or since. It's usually implied, and we get to see how Godzilla feels through his actions or his backstory, but what makes this particular TV show so special is that we get to see Godzilla go through this development in front of our very eyes. We get to see him grow, we see him forced to make emotional decisions. We see him willingly go out of his way to save people and become humanity's hero. This show provides Godzilla with a sense of morality and emotions, which, as the rest of the franchise went on, gradually took this aspect of the character away from him, turning him into a creature who seems to lack any empathy for anything aside from himself. There's a moment in the show where Godzilla stops a train, and it is beautifully done. It's the kind of scene you'd expect from a superhero movie, but adapted to a kaiju one in a plausible and realistic way. Aside from the thousands of times Godzilla saves the main crew, we've seen Godzilla feel empathy for other creatures and for humans caught in battle. Godzilla once freed a ton of sunken ships which all housed humans that were trapped in a tar-like substance, and this was done willingly by Godzilla, without having to be ordered or commanded by Nick. This show knows how to keep the human characters in the action. Instead of going from conference room to conference room like we see in modern Godzilla movies, this show keeps the cast on the ground and in the action. And there's a great reason for this. Instead of being a family that just wants to make it out alive, or being innocent bystanders who have nothing to do with the monsters, Nick forms an organization that specializes in studying and fighting the monster mutations that form across the globe. This is such a smart move because we're actually on the ground with the humans as they investigate each monster attack and find clever ways to put a stop to them. This also leads to us seeing more appealing and different settings every single time because it's such a globe-trotting adventure. We aren't in a new environment every single episode, as Heat headquarters is indeed based in New York and eventually Monster Island, which becomes a recurring location. But generally you'll find that there is a lot of creativity in these environments and it never becomes stale or repetitive. There is a raised issue of how these characters can get from place to place so fast. The Monsterverse introduces us to Hollow Earth pockets, which act as a way of zipping monsters from point A to point B. So what reason does this show offer? Enter the Heatseeker. The Heatseeker is a ship that is pretty much like worn down and poor in appearance, but it serves as the base for the Heat team when they need to go overseas. It's also equipped with like a jet propulsion system to make it go a lot faster than an ordinary ship. There's a laboratory within the ship as well in order for the team to conduct any research they need to when they're on the go. Now I did make a mistake in my What If Godzilla Met King Kong video, as I called the Heat team the Heatseekers when instead it's just the ship that's called the Heatseeker. So thank you to whoever commented that correction. And because Godzilla is so close with Nick, whom he imprinted upon and sees his family, it gives Godzilla a fascinating and logical reason to stick around throughout the plot and fight monsters. The animation quality of the show is top notch as well, especially for one that came out in 1998. The animators clearly put a lot of time and care into bringing the series to life. They draw Godzilla in a very emotive way, where no matter where we see him, we could always tell how he's feeling. The human characters are very well defined in each shot, and throughout many scenes, the animators seem to always nail the scale from humans to monsters. The environments have a lot of effort put into them, and the effort definitely seems to pay off when you watch each episode. Every environment the scene is in, from Tokyo to Monster Island, are filled with immense levels of detail. Each place also has its own color palette and atmosphere that is incredibly well defined when the scene plays out from the start. The animators also seem to exercise a lot of their energy into creating very intricate special effects involving dust, debris, and explosions when the scene calls for it. For instance, check out the shot from Season 2, Episode 6. Look at how great those fire and smoke effects are. The illustrators convey wind and momentum excellently. And the kicker is that this is part of a transition shot from one scene to another. They didn't have to be this detailed with this specific shot, but the creators decided to go with that route anyways because they so clearly have a lot of care and passion going into this show. Every time a monster is chucked through a building or Godzilla fires off his atomic breath, you can feel the impact and sheer force of it, because the animators put in a lot of time and care into make this show so special. Initially, the animation takes a bit of getting used to because of how different it is from a lot of other animations we've grown accustomed to, but it takes a very short amount of time to do so. It really is a beautiful show, and I'm hoping the creators are able to release a remastered HD version, or at least release the HD versions they're already showing on the Throwback Tunes YouTube channel. This show pays a ton of respects to Godzilla's Toho roots. It utilizes multiple aspects of Godzilla's franchise, such as the monster battle formula of the original Showa series, as well as a few darker aspects of the Heisei series, like, being a bit darker and more gritty. With that, the show is not afraid to pay homage to the more campy storylines we've seen in the Showa series, such as alien plotlines and Monster Island stories. I think these aspects are all handled in a grounded way, as the show establishes a set of rules at the start that it follows throughout each episode. There are indeed wacky and fun ideas, as this is still primarily a kids' TV show, but these ideas are handled with the utmost of care and groundedness while also providing a sense of tension amongst the story. The show has monsters that resemble the kinds of kaiju we've seen in the Toho films. I mean, there's a really cool pollution-based monster that resembles Hedorah. There's a giant Yeti monster that resembles King Kong at first, but is then revealed to be a mechanical ape monster that looks to be a homage to Mechanicong, as well as a panned Godzilla vs. King Kong Heisei movie that never made it past the pre-production stage. We get a giant larva moth monster that resembles 𝗦𝗣𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗟, a lava bird monster called 𝗦𝗬𝗘𝗖𝗜𝗔𝗚 that resembles Rodan, and there's even a homage to Mechagodzilla through the original Godzilla being revived and turned into a cyborg via alien technology. On top of there being a ton of other new monsters, all of these fascinating creatures are written with such grace and care. Not every monster is the same, and this is especially true in regards to their motivations. Some kaiju are destroyers, others are new mutations with no ill intent, some are under mind control, some just want to save their young from evil human captors. All of these creatures are written differently, which Godzilla's own franchise seemed to have struggled with, as a lot of the classic villains seem to just be repetitive in motivations. And a lot of these monsters are, like Godzilla, beings with emotions and souls. Instead of seeming mindless, they all seem to have personality and some form of empathy. 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗓, for instance, is a mutated Komodo dragon that becomes a mate to Godzilla. The audience is shown how this creature only cares about its young as it's being hunted down by this giant turtle monster, who I think could even be a reference to 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗓 or Gamera. In an episode titled Deadlock, the Loch Ness Monster is shown attacking a research facility for no apparent reason, but later on in the episode it's revealed that she was only attacking the facility due to them capturing and entrapping her baby. The writers were sure to write each monster differently so as to not only add differing characteristics to each one, but to also form the ability to sympathize with them and feel compassion for them, much like we do with Godzilla. You know, it seems like that it would be the only way to make a monster character worth watching. It's what separates them from being a plot device meant to drive the story forward, to actually turning them into a character. Adding a level of relatability and understanding to that character and what they are doing through their actions is what makes these monsters worth watching. Now, one aspect of film the Godzilla franchise seems to struggle with the most are its human characters. Not the protagonists, which we've already covered how greatly written they are, but the antagonists. There aren't that many well-written human villains within the Godzilla series, to be honest. I mean, I can't even think of a good one aside from Mr. Tako and King Kong vs. Godzilla, and I suppose the businessman from Mothra vs. Godzilla. But case in point, human antagonists in this franchise needs a lot of work. It was never a strong suit of Godzilla's history until this series. One notable human antagonist in this show was Cameron Winter, who's the typical rich businessman character archetype with a lust to gain even more money than he already has. But what makes this character so memorable is how charismatic he is. You could easily buy him as being one of the richest people on the planet because those are the kinds of feelings he evokes when he speaks. His arrogance and conceited demeanor is insanely striking at first glance. It's pretty apparent why Nick has such a disdain for him from the start. The way Winter utilizes each of the team's own individual weaknesses for his benefit, such as Randy flopping in school or Kraven barely having a budget over at Heat, it's obvious how he rose to power. His intelligence was not the only thing that helped him gain his wealth, but also the fact that he knows how to talk to people. He knows how to persuade people into making decisions that will benefit him, and sometimes that's what makes a person dangerous. If the Heat team didn't have as strong a bond as they did, Winter probably would have disassembled the team internally, utilizing nothing but their own personal dilemmas against one another. That's what makes him such a greatly written villain. Granted, there's a huge issue of why he would even need more money despite how rich he is. It becomes an issue you could overlook when you see how Cameron puts the Heat team through hell time and time again. He does seem to regress into stereotypical villain who's money hungry archetype number 657, despite him being a multimillionaire, but again, the character interactions between him and the Heat team usually tend to make up for that. He would need some work as he isn't a perfect villain, but he's memorable and he's nicely written, save for a couple of his motivations. Seeing his interactions with Nick and just how indeceivable Nick is to Cameron's tricks genuinely makes up for it. So I think Cameron Winter being a great villain is just icing on the cake. With new ideas, fresh takes on human characters, a sleek animation style, and incredible character development towards Godzilla himself, Godzilla the series serves as an absolute love letter to the Godzilla franchise. The way this show takes the tropes we have with Godzilla and actually evolves them into something more is what makes this show so memorable. The fact that this show was able to make audiences enjoy this incarnation of Godzilla after the sour taste they had from 1998's film is a major feat in and of itself. It's a true testament to how greatly written this series is, and on top of all the other reasons we covered, it's clear that that is what makes Godzilla the series so special. Thank you all so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next one. Until next time, bye bye.